Tighten that. That looks funny with the light. My hair looks funny. All right. Sorry about that.
A Canadian wearing a Captain America shirt.
I wore it when I got my vaccine because I wanted them to have a target. That was my idea.
Like Pulp Fiction.
Mm. Mm.
Stab you right in the heart with a shot of adrenaline. Well, not necessary for the no idea zone, sir. We like it. We like it lethargic, disorganized. We may just feature your moving camera work from the kitchen to the office as a
Fantastic
episode, because that's what we go for here: authenticity.
You were getting it. We made a roast beef sandwich.
Oh, nice.
As we were doing some running around, we're getting our winter tires taken off. So I was running around all day, and then I made a coffee. I was trying to, by the way, for the listeners, I was 2 minutes early. So by the time we sat down, it was exactly on the scheduled time. So
that's true. That's true. And you're on a different time zone. Where are you exactly, Lars?
I'm directly north of Montana.
Oh, so we're in the same time zone.
Nope, Mountain. I'm in Mountain Standard.
You're in Mountain, so you're 1 hour later than me.
That's correct. Yeah, so it's 2:30 p.m. where you are, 3:30 p.m. where I am.
Okay, so this isn't too difficult. This wasn't too bad of a. Where are you in Canada exactly?
Edmonton.
Edmonton, Canada. That's what it's going to say underneath your wonderful picture. Edmonton, Canada. I guess let me give you a proper intro before we, because I'm already, I just start recording at the beginning because it's the best stuff, and our producer will edit out all the, frenetic stuff up until the sit down. So this gentleman, and then we'll get into how we know each other, which is kind of cool, has been, as much as I know, is the founder of the Okanagan Comedy Festival. Did I pronounce that right?
So I was a comedian for about, I guess for 10 years before I started the Okanagan Comedy Festival.
Okanagan.
The history of that's actually kind of fun. We'll talk about that later if we have a chance.
Yeah.
But yeah, after doing comedy for 10 years, I started a comedy festival as well, which I hope most of the time the people who start festivals or clubs are often frustrated comedians or perhaps failed comedians. I hope I'm not in that category. There was some logic behind where and when I put it. So yeah, I started the Okanagan Comedy Festival.
Okay, and also the Fire Pit Comedy Tour, is that yours?
It is.
Fire Pit Comedy Tour, that sounds like a outdoor summer camp kind of thing. Pretty cool. Storytelling kind of thing. And then you're regularly entertaining the troops as well. American troops, I believe, and you have a comedy. You have a comedy half-hour special.
An hour
special. What is the title of that? Because I couldn't find it.
So they called them Comedy Now. So
it's a Canadian
often a Canadian. Yeah, the Canadian version of Comedy Central is called the Comedy Network. So it's fun, even going back to like CMT, like country music television or whatever. Like we have a Canadian version of almost everything that America has.
Oh, that's so funny.
And so Comedy Central in Canada, which is our comedy network, is called the Comedy Network. We have what would essentially be the Comedy Central Presents. So it was called Comedy Now. So they filmed them for, I think, 14 seasons or 15 seasons. And they did around, I think they did about, if I had to guess, around, 16 to 20 different comedians got one each year. So, and then you had the choice. Here's a fun little factoid for the listeners. They went around to the 10 or 12 people that were recording the year that I was there. They said to the person, are you doing a half hour or an hour? And then the person went, whatever, half hour. And then they just ticked that. It paid exactly the same either way.
Oh my gosh, that's so fun.
So it didn't make a difference.
Because we know, those of us in the comedy world down here, we know that the Comedy Central special, Comedy Central Presents, don't pay much at all. They never have.
Well, here's what I'll do. You're grateful to get them. Really, the Comedy Now on the Comedy Network is what broke Russell Peters. The footage from his second Comedy Now is what made Russell Peters a megastar. It went crazy viral. YouTube was new. So that made him a sensation, an internet sensation. I will tell people that number if they direct message me on social media. They don't have to follow me if they don't want to. But if they go to Extra Lars, E-X-T-R-A, Extra Lars, L-A-R-S, send me a message. I will send you what the amount was. It gets even kind of more interesting. When you signed the contract, they were like, do you want an hour or do a half hour, an hour? I said, I'll do the hour, which was only 48. You only had to do 48 minutes because of commercials and stuff. So in the contract, it reads, they have the rights to that recording, not your material, just the recording. Right. They have the rights to that recording in the universe.
Perpetuity.
In perpetuity, right? But I love the in the universe. In the universe.
In the universe.
In perpetuity.
Anywhere so in the plays on Mars, because we may colonize other planets before we solve homelessness.
Can you imagine if you got like you became a millionaire because they colonized the moon and your contract only said the Earth? But it was really, there was a great line from Jimmy Dore. He's a comedian from originally Chicago, but
I know him.
Yeah, he's lived in Los Angeles for decades. But he has a great line. It's one of my favorites. He goes, people go, yeah, everybody has a Comedy Central Presents. He goes, you know who says that? People who don't have one. And that's how you feel about a Comedy Now, is that I feel honestly, and God, I hate to be cliche or cheesy, but I feel honored that I got one. And it was really cool. And they treat you like gold and put you up at a 5-star hotel, and you have a personal assistant for the week and wardrobe and makeup and, photographer. So you feel like a rock star for a week. And then when people are like, do you have a Comedy Now? You go, yeah, I have a Comedy Now. So even though it might not sound impressive, it's one of those things where if you've been in comedy for 10, 15 years and you didn't get one, it often speaks to your level
or your talent. Level of not having connections.
Sure, that could definitely be it as well. Right. Yeah, and so yeah, I'll tell people though, if they message me and ask, I'll definitely tell them.
Okay, so your comedy special is the Lars Callieou Comedy Now, and I pronounced your name right.
Callieou. Exactly right.
Comedy Now special, and you can see some of it on YouTube. And if you're in Canada, you may catch it. It might come on your TV. You never know.
Still every 2 months, but they put it on MTV Canada, which of course there's an MTV Canada, and then they put it on the Comedy Network, and then they'll put it on a couple other networks. So as soon as it plays, my social media blows up. People are like, hey, you're on my TV, you're on my TV. So I mean, it's 10 years old now, but
so this answers a question for me, which is that you can elaborate more, but you can make a living in Canada being a comic without any US bullshit. You don't have to do any US stuff to be a pretty successful Canadian comedian.
That's a neat idea. Well, I mean, the answer, if you're funny anywhere, you can make a living doing it. The cost of living in the smaller, like Edmonton is a city of about 1.1 million people. Vancouver, about 3 million people. Toronto, about 5 million people. So it's a smaller Canadian city. But you can make a living if you're funny, because there's a lot of corporate work that there used to be, that you could, in November and December, you could supplement your income by doing company Christmas parties. And it's economics 101, supply and demand. If you have some TV specials and you can be clean for an hour, then you can do these corporate parties, which pay you enough to live on. If you want to, I don't have kids or anything. So if you want to go to Australia or Asia or tour to all these different places, you have the luxury of doing that because it's all kind of supplemented by the corporate money that exists, because there's not a lot of comedians in Western Canada, that being Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, who can do an hour of clean, funny comedy. So there's some fantastic.
It's sort of a wild west over there. You haven't really had like a boom like we had here in the US with comedy, because in the US, every town, I've been doing this 25 years. Every town have like several hundred comedians now. It's like everybody's bucket list is to become a comedian. And it was a Jedi kind of a thing back sort of 15, 20 years ago. Where I started, I was one of maybe 5 people who were even fucking with comedy. And I don't think the other 4 are still in it.
Yeah, there are certainly, I would say in a city of 1 million people, there's probably you know, when open mics were around, I think there was close to 100, maybe like around, give or take, on any, you know, any given week, that we're doing comedy. So the numbers are up there. There's certainly a lot of people that are giving it, you know, taking a crack at it. There's no doubt about that. But here's what I found, and May 18th of this year will be 18 years for me. So I was a little behind you in that.
Quite a while.
But here's the math that I think there's a half-life that I've seen over these, you know, 2 decades in comedy. Is there's, say, 100 comedians who start doing comedy in 2012. The following year, of those 100 who tried an open mic or went to an amateur night, of those 100, 50 of them are left on year, like 12 months later. And then 12 months after that, 25 are left. And then 12 months after that, 12 are left. Oh, so every year from your graduating class, you would have seen that initial however many. Each year there would have been half of you left, until there's only 2 or 3 of you left. And from my, like, air quotes, graduating class, there really is like 2 or 3 out of the initial 50 or 60 who started. Every year, like a half of them got married or got a real job or decided that it was, you know, the rejection was too much to take, or they, you know,
or they just weren't good.
Sure. That's definitely one of the issues. But yeah, it's like, we see it, and you must have seen so. I was thinking about some guys today on the drive. There was a guy named Vic Lapucci, and I was thinking of people who don't do it anymore.
It's a good comedy name.
Vic. Oh my God, Vic Lapucci was fun. He is funny, but he quit doing comedy probably 10, 12 years ago. So most of the people that are starting comedy in Canada now wouldn't be familiar with guys like Vic Lapucci or this wonderful comedian named Mike Cliff. And Mike Cliff was the first guy I ever got paid to do comedy with. I opened for him. And when you said Fire Pit Comedy Tour sounds like a camp, Mike Cliff had this joke that was exceptional. He goes, my summer camp was so bad when I was growing up that our flag was a tear-stained pillowcase.
Pretty good. That's pretty good. Dude,
yeah.
I started with, there was a guy, he had been doing comedy a little longer than me, so he wasn't exactly someone I started with. But there were so few back in the mid-90s, you kind of had to lump everybody together. But this guy was like, he was doing guest spots, and within a few years he was headlining. And his name was Mike Allen. And he was a Navy SEAL who had become a stand-up. So he actually had some skills in life. He wasn't like your garden variety comic like me, who was just a person who couldn't hack it in college and just decided to, you know, whatever, fuck off. So he had a couple great jokes, man. He was so funny. And I remember somebody telling me that he quit comedy a few years ago. About 7 or 8 years ago, someone told me from back in the day. Someone was like, yeah, Mike's not doing comedy anymore. And dude, I had seen John Leguizamo do literally verbatim a joke of Mike Allen on one of his specials. Now, I don't know if someone saw Mike Allen do it and sold it to John Leguizamo or how it got to him, but I felt so badly for him, man, because he was good. But, you know, at some point he was like, this is a horrible rat race. So at some point he was like, look, you know, I'm 50 or whatever, and I'm married and I have kids, and this is no life. Right? So finally he just kicked in the can.
Well, because we don't know how the story played out for them, I always hope that it's a happier ending. I hope that they look back and go, yeah, it just wasn't for me. Like, and whatever they're doing now brings them as much joy and as much happiness as doing stand-up did. Or maybe he's a professional writer for a TV show and he's a millionaire, like whatever the case. But I think it speaks to your character a little bit to want good comics to stay in comedy. Like when I think back to somebody like Mike Cliff, that's the first time I ever saw somebody kill. Like the first time I saw somebody really kill was Mike Cliff. And it was one of the, it was so magical. So if we're in a comedy club, I'm looking directly across the room. So the stage would be to my left, and I'm not watching the stage. I'm watching the audience like perpendicular. So I'm just watching, and you could see all of the people lurch forward and lurch back and lurch forward and lurch back. You could see like a field of wheat blowing in the wind. They were all in unison, just lurching forward. And I was like, this is the most magical thing
it's powerful.
I have ever
powerful
seen.
To see that. Absolutely.
Yeah, he killed
powerful.
so hard.
But also, it was not just that he was killing, it was that you were moved by his comedy. You were also connecting with him. Because I've seen guys kill like that. Well, maybe not like that, but the Jerry Seinfeld, Ray Romano kill, where they're very metered and cadenced, people don't lurch back like that. They don't lurch back and forth. Like, it's not a people falling out of their chair. I saw Richard Jeni do that, though. Richard Jeni killed. I don't think I've ever seen anybody kill like that. Like, I physically, my body hurt when I left that room. But how can a guy like that, Lars, just between you and me, how can a guy like that ever quit comedy? If you can do that, what, I mean, it has to be some violent act of nature to keep you from doing it.
Well, I was listening to a podcast with Stanhope, and Stanhope said, I could quit comedy. I could never quit comedians. And listening to Stanhope, he's like, I've mastered this. He's like, I've perfected this. I know exactly how to do this. I know the formula. I know what this is. And I think, I mean, I love listening to stand-up. I love listening. And I think stand-up, oh God, when you watch Stanhope do stand-up,
yeah,
it's otherworldly. This is a master level of, like, you just go like, could I ever in my wildest dreams come close to something like that? I don't know. Like, I don't think so. So I want to tell myself that one day I could be.
That's the kind of comedian you want to be, though. When you imagine yourself as where you'll end up, right? And we'll parlay this is to be like stand-up. Who are some of your other ones you love?
Well, I like, as we get better and further into our comedy careers, and we see that somebody really has a perspective, somebody has a real voice and an opinion, and those terms are just so cliched in this business of ours. But to have a real opinion and be able to make that funny, I think is the best comedians in the world. I was watching, I watched a couple of shows with Jim Jeffries when he was working out one of his last specials. This would have been 2018 or 2019. And I went to two of his shows back to back, and he was hammering out his response to all the hate mail he gets from the gun control bit. It was exceptional. It was one of the great, he goes, I'm not against gun control. And the way, again, this is Jim Jeffries talking, his opinion about that was so fucking great. And he goes, I'm not against guns. He goes, there was a woman in Walmart, and I'm paraphrasing. There was a woman in Walmart who was shot by her 2-year-old. Like, her 2-year-old went into her, purse and pulled the trigger on a gun. And he goes, there were 2 other kids with her. If they would have given those other kids guns when that 2-year-old pulled out the Glock, the other two kids could have protected the mom from the 2-year-old. He goes, give everybody a gun. I'm not against guns. He goes, does anybody here know what that woman did? And somebody in the audience shouted out, she was a rocket scientist. And he goes, yeah, she was a rocket scientist. So you can't say that this person was a moron. She was a rocket scientist. He goes, I don't even know how to dress to look like a rocket scientist. He goes, I know how to dress to look like a doctor. I could put on a stethoscope and a lab coat. I could pretend I don't even know what the fuck to wear to look like a rocket scientist. That's how bad. So his take on this, and the response that he got from the gun control bit, which was, really just this powerful, poignant bit, was just that idea, that perspective. So anytime I see a comedian speak to something heavy, like a Stanhope, speak to something in society that where you're like, I think that there's either an injustice or there's something that's wrong. Like Stanhope, I don't know if he ever did the bit on a special, but he was talking about how there was like a gay NFL football player. And he goes, their big concern is that they have to shower with this gay player. Stanhope is like, they're the richest athletes in the world. Go to Home Depot and buy some fucking shower dividers. Like, how are these guys still in communal showers? Call your agent, tell them to put like solo showers in. Like, that's, and you're like, oh God, why didn't I think of that?
You're like really an admirer of people who are able to, who have a lot to say and are able to express an opinion that is purely theirs and make it really funny. You're kind of like, you're mesmerized by that. Because you must have, like George Carlin was really sort of the height of that. He lived the American comics dream when it came to that, you know?
Yeah. And going back to like the Bill Hicks and the Lenny Bruce, I'm listening to a lot of Lenny Bruce right now. And to hear how they craft in their vocabulary, the same exact thing with a Bill Hicks, where here's somebody who's incredibly well read, but kind of almost plays a bit of a buffoonish character. Whereas, and having like, I love biographies, and I don't know if you've listened to the last Carlin biography, but the audiobook, his brother reads it, and his brother sounds almost identical to him.
Like him.
It's really trippy, but it's so well written. But with his education, Carlin was a little bit self-conscious that people would think he was stupid. So Carlin always wanted to make sure his material was the smartest in the room. Whereas somebody like a Hicks or a Lenny Bruce or a Pryor, I don't think they had that same baggage of like needing to sound brilliant. Hicks Matt.
Yeah, Hicks had the opposite problem of Carlin. Hicks was a super nerdy guy who wanted to come off like a tough guy. He was a college professor who wanted to come off like a tough guy. And George Carlin was a tough guy from the streets of New York who wanted to be respected.
Sound like a professor. Sound like a professor. Yep.
Right. But Carlin also had a whole thing about wanting to be Danny Kaye. He wanted to be a big acting star. And there are even interviews with Carlin. If you see, there's one on Larry King clip on YouTube where he it's so fascinating. He's like, maybe they'll know I can act now. This is like 1993, 94. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna get bigger acting roles. And I'm like, dude, you've changed the art. That's not really was his first love. It wasn't his first love comedy. So, you know, and then you got like Sam Kinison, another guy.
Oh, yeah.
Sam Kinison was a preacher, right? So all these guys, everybody has a different ego thing that they're dealing with. But
such great points.
It's refreshing to hear that you like that, because you know that's what I've always liked, and brings me to how you and I met. Do you remember how you and I met? Actually,
you know, I don't. I don't.
That's great. That's great. You don't even know how we know each other, do you?
Well, were we at a festival?
No, we've never met in person. You contacted me out of the blue you had a comedy radio show. To be honest with you,
still have it.
I didn't even know you were a comic. I just thought you found me or you found my comedy, and you called me up and said, we'd like to interview you. It's a Canadian comedy radio show. You had a co-host, and you wanted to ask my opinions on comedy and have me on and play a clip of my comedy, I guess. It might have been a video. I don't know if it was video or audio or what. And I just, at the time that it happened, it must have been about 8 years ago. It was a while ago. You know, it was like nobody was recognizing me. And you found me and you put me on this show, which you don't remember, which is fucking hysterical. And I thought, you know, when I got this podcast, I thought, and I followed you, you know, I followed your career. I followed you on Twitter. And so I know about you. I know about your love for hockey and all this other shit. But I thought, well, I've got my own podcast now. I'm going to have him on, and right. So, but I didn't know anything about your stand-up or anything until I finally investigated you and saw your special and such. But that's how we met, brother.
So I'll tell you, so the radio show, it's on a great station. It's a university radio station in Edmonton called CJSR, 88.5 FM. So I've had this radio show for 16 years or 15 years. It was 15 years this March. If I stumbled across a clip of somebody that spoke to me, and it probably only happened 8 or 10 times tops, and I could play this to every guest I've ever had on my radio show, and it's once a week for 15 years. So you're talking like hundreds and 700 shows. I could play how we met to every guest we've ever had, and 5 or 6 of them would be like, yeah, that's how you found me. There's really just a really tiny, minute amount of people that I would have reached out to interview that way. Because most of the people that I have on the show or had on the show are friends of mine that I worked with somewhere around the world. So that tip of the cap of like, oh, I would have found a clip of yours and I would have really enjoyed it. That's how I would have ended up reaching out to you.
That's a wonderful thing to hear. As a comic, that's a wonderful thing to hear. I really didn't know how you found me. I don't think I ever asked you. I assumed you found a YouTube clip because it was a YouTube clip, I believe, that you played. But it would have been me in a black club. There weren't a lot of white comedians in black clubs. So I don't know if that rings a bell to you, but I don't know if in your 15, 16 years you could ever go back and find that episode. But
yeah, absolutely, we'd still have it.
Well, it might be interesting to do a follow-up, and
okay,
and
absolutely,
we can trace that back. But I was curious if you'd remembered that. I mean, it was a while ago.
Yeah, the Stanhope's been on the radio show, and what was interesting, I never wanted to podcast it. If you can, like, there's a few things that, and I'm like, I never want to sound egomaniacal. It's just so ugh. Especially if you're Canadian, you have to have humility, otherwise it's over for you. But our radio show, my radio show called Comic Genius with a J, which I'm incredibly proud of the name. So Comic Genius, the idea of having a visual joke, genius with a J, on a radio show. So when you're like, you're listening to Comic Genius, well, the joke doesn't make any sense because it's an audio medium. You'd have to see it. So I love that Comic Genius. So I just wanted it to be us to be able to do the show and then just have it released into the cosmos. I just wanted it to be like just the beauty of let's just do it live. And then I would have been in studio when we called you.
Yes. Yes.
And we did it in the midnight to 2 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Every single Wednesday for 15 years is when we were in studio doing the show. Nominated for 2 Canadian Comedy Awards, the show. And we won Best Non-Commercial DJs in Edmonton. So of all the commercial radio stations, the non-commercial ones, they named us the best DJs one year, which was pretty cool. But I never wanted to podcast it. And the show predates the first official comedy podcast, like the first person who's given credit for having a comedy podcast. We were about a year before that person. Now, I think there's been comedy radio shows since the beginning of radio, like since Marconi, at the beginning of the 1900s or late 1800s. So there's been comedy radio. So I don't want to be like, I had a podcast before there were podcasts. Like, yeah, but you had a radio show that did comedy and there were comedy radio shows before that. So we did the exact format of a comedy podcast. And I've had a few people go, hey, how come you don't have a comedy podcast? And I go, because I've had a radio show for 15 years. They go, why don't you have a podcast? I'm like, what the fuck do you think a podcast is? It's just a comedy radio show that people put on the internet.
It is a radio show and a talk show. I mean, a podcast is a talk show. I mean, it's not that different. It's sort of a cross between those two things, a talk show and a radio show. But a radio show and a talk show are the same fucking thing too. So
and I don't know. The idea of ever looking at my numbers, like looking at how many people saw, like listened to it or didn't listen to it, I would have shot myself in the head. Like I'd have been like, I can't do this. So I wanted to not exist. When people are like, oh, I missed your show. I'm like, well, there'll be another one. Have a good one. Like when we had our 10-year show.
Isn't that the best way to do it? Isn't that the best way to do it, to not care and just you put them out and it doesn't make a difference. Because I feel that way because I don't love the podcasting. I'm grateful for it, especially this past year with the pandemic. But it's not like if I had to survive mentally and creatively on this podcasting, I don't know that it would be that good. Like it's not like stand-up,
Yeah, and it's smart to do it for self-promotion, and people really are interested. It's fun to listen to people talk about comedy. So to podcast it, I probably could have built a little bit bigger fan base, which is nice. And of course, when you see Joe Rogan get paid $100 million by Sirius XM, you're like, maybe I should have podcasted.
Well, but he was the host of he was on network television for years, in front of the dumbest cross section of America, the dumbest cross section of the population, who probably aren't as dumb as apparently, because Rogan is not a dumb guy, obviously. But yeah, I mean, they cast a wide net with Joe Rogan's name on it, so he's
Yeah.
just parlaying that. I mean, you know. But
Yeah, and he's championed so many other people, like the way that he really built a mass, the same way that that Jeff Foxworthy did for his guys. He really, to make Bill Engvall and Ron White and Larry the Cable Guy. That's, Russell Peters does that. Fluffy does that. Like Gabe does that for his guys. They're just good people, and I'm a fan of people that help out other comics, and the way that the way that he helped out Coco. And I mean, these are tremendous comics who weren't getting perhaps the love and exposure they deserve. And then one of their, famous friends just kind of goes, "Hey, hop on." And as cheesy as the quote is, if you reach the top, it's your job to send the elevator back down. And that's precisely what a lot of these guys have done, is just brought their friends up to the perhaps level of success that they might have already deserved. So I think you're right. Joe Rogan's a smart guy, and he was on network television with a couple of different shows, with talk radio and everything else. And
Fear Factor, that I was talking,
Mm-hmm.
I was specifically referring to Fear Factor, not was it News Radio? I think he was on
News Radio. That was
Radio.
one. Yeah,
yeah. That was a good show, but yeah, he was on the host of Fear Factor, which was like people forget, and I'm glad they forget, because that's the kind of thing you should forget. But people forget what a huge, massive thing that was for like 3 or 4 years.
It was the biggest show on television.
Right.
And there's a casino here in Edmonton that's been pretty good to me. So if they had a big name act come through, they got a 2,000 seat showroom, and they would use me as a support act for some of the people. And and it sounds like I'm name dropping. Please God, don't. But I did Martin Short, I think, was the first one, and then Joan Rivers, Bob Saget, and Jay Moore, Roseanne Barr.
It's on your bio that you worked with Joan Rivers and.
She was. Oh my! I have. Yeah, but they called me and they're like, "Hey, would you open for Joe Rogan on whatever the date was?" And I go, "You don't need me." And they go, "Well, we have the contract. We're supposed to provide the opening act." And I said, "No." I go, "Rogan always tours with his guys." I go, "There's no way he's using a local act." And they said, "No, we got. Do you want the gig or not?" And they're friends of mine. They're really great guys, the promoters. And I said, "Okay, I'll sign the contract, but you're not going to need me." And they phoned me 3 weeks later, and they were like, Rogan's bringing his own guys. I'm like, yeah, he does. That's what he does.
You know what I like about him is so many people who have become successful, they promote comedians who are not as funny as they are. And I won't give any names I won't give any bad juju names of those. I'm sure there are plenty that everybody knows of that go, "Oh, his friends are never as funny as him." But Rogan has no problem. He has no insecurity about promoting people who are like Joey Diaz, who are funnier than him. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Joey Diaz is somebody who's funnier than him. And I have always kind of fantasized, if I had that level of notoriety, there are 3 or 4 guys who are so much funnier than me, who nobody knows about, and it would be such a fucking thrill to just be the guy who presents that. And Rodney Dangerfield was another one. He was
the champion.
No problem with rolling out people who are as funny as him, if not funnier. He gave us Sam Kinison.
Yeah, Rodney, I love history of comedy. For people who don't know, Rodney Dangerfield, besides having a club, but in his club, which just closed, I want to buy it and leave it open. Like, I want to win the lottery and then just have somebody run that club, because being without Dangerfields is just wrong. If you're listening to this and you have $100 million, buy Dangerfields. If and when I win the lottery, I will buy it for twice as much as you bought it for, and we'll just let the manager run it. But anyway, he had a thing called the Young Comedian Special.
That's it.
And on that Young Comedian Special, he had on Bob Saget, exactly like you said, Kinison. A lot of them, their first television spots were the Young Comedian Special that Dangerfield was the producer of. Andrew Dice Clay was one of the first ones on there. So Bob Saget was a pallbearer in Dangerfield's for his funeral. Like, Saget and Dangerfield were pretty good friends, and all of those young guys, David Spade, Adam Sandler, like all of these, Jenny, I think. Don't quote me. Actually, somebody had to fact check on that. Roseanne. All of these people, Dangerfield would be like, "Come along," and he treated young comics and rising stars. He made them. He made a lot of these. Dangerfield is one of the greatest of all time. Just
talk about
purely
from the standpoint of helping people. He helped in the late 80s and early 90s, probably 70% of the comics that got famous were from that Young Comedian special. Funny story. So my buddy Howard Berger, he wrote a couple jokes for Dangerfield. Funny dude. You would a Canadian. He's from Toronto, actually.
Aaron Berg?
Howard Berger.
Oh, Howard Berger. Okay.
Yeah, and Howard Berger. And I tried to have him on, and he didn't know how to Zoom, and he couldn't get in the meeting. So we had like 20 minutes of him trying to get in the meeting, which was also funny. But anyway, he said Kinnison, 1982, 81 or 82, went on at Dangerfields in New York, walked 250 people. The whole fucking crowd got up and left. Whatever he was doing was not what they wanted. And 6 months later, he was back there to tape the Young Comedian special. And Howard said, he looked at me, he goes, I never thought they'd let me back on stage here. It's amazing. So people don't realize the eggs that get cracked to make the omelet. They think that like, especially from the legendary comedians, because you don't have social media where people are bombing and, you know, everybody, you can really yell about a comedian who's bad. But a lot of those comics prior to, they would bomb and bomb and bomb, and nobody knows that. Everybody thinks these brilliant comedians came out like an immaculate conception, you know.
Yeah, I was on the east coast of Canada, opening for Bob Saget, and Bob was working on his new hour. Well, if you're the opening act, you're not workshopping shit. So I do my 20, 25 minutes of the hits, and it goes well. And a couple people were like, I don't know, I thought you were funnier than Bob Saget. And I go, yeah, he's doing a brand new hour, and I'm doing the best jokes I've ever written. Which is not tooting my own horn. I'm like, that's the best I can do. There is nothing above that level for me. And 6 months later, his new hour was nominated for a Grammy. I'm like, we're doing different things.
Yeah.
He was nominated with the Scottish guy who had a talk show. Why am I drawing a blank on his name?
Billy Connolly?
No.
You mean Craig Ferguson?
Thank you. So Craig Ferguson and Bob Saget were both nominated for Best Comedy Album of the Year. And I just wanted one of them to win. I was like, please, I wanted Saget to have that Grammy. My life as a C-list celebrity or whatever, the redhead, what's her
Kathy Griffin.
She won the Grammy. I was like, I got nothing against Kathy Griffin, but
alive.
I'm sure I believe in redemption. I believe in forgiveness. I believe
Kathy Griffin is definitely you can't say anything bad, Lars. You're Canadian.
Well, I believe in it though. I believe, if we're always measured by our past mistakes, if nobody will ever give you a second chance, if nobody ever, I was watching this great, I hope I can find the joke. There was a great Sarah Silverman. She was talking on her show about Neil Brennan doing a joke about LeBron James. It was so great. He goes, people always want to see you as who you were in the past, and they never let you grow past that. No matter how much you've changed in your life, they never let you forget where you were. It's like, imagine showing LeBron, and I'm quoting Sarah Silverman, quoting who I believe was Neil Brennan. She goes, it's like, Neil Brennan goes, it's like if somebody showed LeBron James a picture of him at 15. Like, this is you, right? He goes, well, I've changed since then. I've grown. Yeah, but this is you, right? Yeah, but changed. I've grown. Okay, but that's you. And I feel that that's how, when people want to bring up something from the past or something a mistake we might have made, it's like, okay, but where is redemption? Where is forgiveness? Where is any kind of an opportunity to make amends for any mistakes you might have made? So I didn't know I don't know Kathy Griffin. Wasn't a huge fan of her comedy, but I've met Bob Saget and worked with Bob Saget. So I was rooting for him as a friend. And I knew that hour that he had done on that, like when we did that in Moncton, New Brunswick, where people were like, I don't know, I thought Lars was a bit better that night. And I'm like, yeah, because we were doing different things. I was doing 15 years of the best jokes I've ever written, and Bob Saget's working on a new hour. Those are very different things. And then he's nominated for a Grammy, and I was like, see, there you go. One, not just one of the best hours of comedy around, one of the best in the world, because he was nominated for a Grammy. So I'm a fan. He's such a nice guy, just a diamond guy.
Oh yeah, man, Bob Saget, he's the best. I mean, I don't know him as a person, but I've always been a fan of him. You know, poor Bob Saget, he got kind of screwed a little bit in the 90s because he got all that mainstream popularity from his Disney dad, persona that he had. I'm sure he got sick of himself probably doing that shit.
Oh yeah, but he always he really did parody himself. Like he made so much fun of that, and he was a dirty comedian when Dangerfield discovered him in the late 70s. So going up through the early 80s.
Yeah, that was his whole thing was he was the guy who looks like he's on the straight and narrow, who's completely foul-mouthed and filthy.
Yeah, and really, like, when people were shocked by his comedy, he was like, by the way, I've never changed my comedy. This is exactly what my comedy is. But he's so nice. I remember we were doing a show in Edmonton at the casino, and he went probably 12 minutes long. So he's supposed to do an hour, just 72 minutes. He comes off stage, and all 5 of the entertainment directors and, like, the promoters and everything are there. And he walks off stage. And as soon as he walks off stage, he was like, oh my goodness, everybody, I'm so sorry. I know I went a bit long. I want to apologize. I hope it's okay. And they were all like, no, they were loving it. It was great. But how gracious he was, and how kind, and how he has time for everybody. The first time I ever saw him work, I wasn't doing the show, would have been 2004. And I remember him taking every picture and signing every autograph for 3 hours. Everybody who wanted a picture got $1 million smile. Everybody who wanted an autograph got one, whatever they wanted him to sign. And I saw years later, when I worked with him and toured with him, I saw he was just that gracious. And he was sending out a joke tweet. You can probably find it. It was about a porta potty. Like, it was about the bathroom in our green room in Edmonton. And he had a picture of the porta potty. He's about to send out the tweet. And he turns to me, he goes, you think this is too mean? And so he was like, oh God, I don't want to sound like I'm being He really is. But like, loves comedy, prolific. He's just a hell of a guy, and really funny, and loves comedy, and was a, Dangerfield really kind of discovered him, and he never forgot that.
Dangerfield put him on the map. He might have also done a couple other. He may have done. I don't think he did Carson or Letterman because he was so R-rated.
No, I think he would have got to do Carson. That's a good question. That is a great. I'm going to look that up after the show.
Yeah, you got to look that up. You got to look that up.
But I think Saget did Carson.
The Young Comedian Special, and Bill Hicks was another one who got his launch on there. I think Bill Hicks, and I want to say Kinnison and Bill Hicks and Andrew Dice Clay were all on the same episode.
Oh, that would be
you could imagine. And Don Herrera and Robert Townsend, and now I'm remembering Jeff Foxworthy, Jerry Seinfeld, Tim Allen. I mean, everybody who ended up being a major star came through that. So it was just Dangerfield was just hitting. He was getting his fame, massive fame, and HBO was just becoming a massively famous thing. So it was like an intersection of two. It was like Breaking Bad and Netflix at the same time, kind of that.
Yeah,
kind of
perfection.
thing.
Yeah, perfect storm. So I'm sure most of your listeners are comedy fans. There was a group from Houston called the Outlaws. So they were the Outlaws of comedy. And in that group was Bill Hicks and Sam Kinison, a guy by the name of Carl LeBeau. So when we talk about, which is why I wanted to mention him. So the story is, gosh, if I had a genie, like if there was a genie, hey, look, we'll do it with mine. I got this when I was on tour in Iraq. That's how much name dropping I am. If I could make it look like it's bigger than it is, I'll rub my genie lamp. If I had 3 wishes, if I had 3 wishes, I would use one of those wishes to have everybody have seen Carl LeBeau do an hour of comedy, because Carl LeBeau doing an hour of comedy was one of the greatest things I have ever seen in my life. And I'm not saying that because he just passed away. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone, Nikki Payne maybe, like Burr, but I mean, in one of the top 10 funniest humans I've ever seen in my life, ever. And Carl LeBove, so you look up The Outlaws, it's a great, really cool story. Stephen Giuliano Moore, I think was the other, and just really, really, just goddamn, Carl LeBove was funny.
What was the guy from Boston? He was part of that crew too. Lenny Clark.
No, Lenny Clark never. Well, he didn't. I don't think he spent any time in Houston. But so it's on Wikipedia.
But he toured with Sam. He was Sam's
Oh yeah.
buddy.
Oh yeah.
He was Sam's
Yeah,
buddy.
Jimmy Schubert did as well. So Jimmy Schubert opened quite a bit for Kinnison, like was with him on the road. But so Carl LeBove, God, he was, and every comedian. So Carl LeBove did comedy for 30 years, and he just passed away. I looked up from the pic where I looked through my pictures to find out what year it was. So in 2013, I was in Tampa at Side Splitters, and I was working with a comedian named Carl LeBove. Now, I didn't know the name then. I should have, but I didn't. And I watched this guy rip the room apart for 6, 7 shows. I mean, as people were like, he was fucking hilarious. And I mean, his mind was so fast. And so nice off stage, so nice. So the story, for people who might not know it, is he had a daughter that he raised with an ex-wife, like paid like child support for years and years and years. And it was much later in the daughter's life when they learned that the daughter was actually Sam Kinnison's. So Sam Kinnison had slept with Carl LeBeau's wife, and they had a child. It's a well-documented story in the comedy history, but so it's not new news. I'm not breaking anything, but just so gracious and kind and thoughtful. But every comedian I have on any of my social medias, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, they all shouted out Carl LeBeau. They all said this was one of the greatest comedic minds in my life, and I have to agree. Mm-hmm.
And he was unfortunately in Sam's shadow. Sam cast a big shadow, and even Bill Hicks, who later on got recognized posthumously, was in the shadow of Sam. They all ended up in Sam, but equally as brilliant. I mean, Carl LeBeau and Bill Hicks were equally brilliant. You know, maybe funnier, maybe better stand-ups even. Just Kinnison was more of a larger than life. You know, there's some of it in show business. It's a lot of times it's the spectacle, you know, and he was a spectacle.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we're not the famous person on the show, we're often not held to the high standards. So there was an Amy Schumer special that came out that was a little bit soft. Now, I've seen Amy Schumer live a bunch of times at the Cellar, and I've seen her live, you know, in concert in different places. She is a fucking hell of a comic. Like she's tight. Like she's a New York comic. She fucking bangs. She has chops. So when people go, I didn't like her last special, I'm like, okay, but Netflix offered her $8 million to do a comedy special. It takes 2 years to have an hour of comedy be any good. And if somebody makes you punch it out in 9 or 10 months, it's not going to be great, but somebody gave you $8 million. So I don't, like, when I look at that hour that Bob Saget was doing, I don't look at that hour and go, not that great. Whereas, you know, exactly what you're saying, where it's like, these might have been better comics. They also had the freedom to kind of work in anonymity. They had the freedom that they weren't held to the standard of. And if Sam Kinison did an old joke that was on one of his older albums, everyone would have been like, that's old stuff. Everybody wants to see a new joke for that element of surprise. So they expect new material, but they also want that new material to be at the same level as your old material. So
I think the comic like Schumer, and I don't know all the moving parts or anything, but I think a comic like Amy Schumer, who, like, differently than Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle getting a special or a deal where they've been doing it 20 years, you know, and Amy Schumer maybe hadn't been doing it as long, and she got a level of fame pretty quick. And
she was 10, 12 years in.
She accepted a lot more pressure than she probably should have. to put out a lot of comedy in a short time. And Bill Burr was on Rogan actually talking about this, and he was talking about putting out. And Rogan was like, do you have a timetable that you're going to put out a new, And Burr goes, no, I put it out when it's ready. I mean, if you get big enough, you can call those shots. You can say, I'm going to put out a special when I'm ready. And Burr made the great point of, look, I didn't get into this business to work hard. I got into this business to do what I want on my own time. That's one of the luxuries of becoming famous. You want to fucking do it when you want to do it and put it out when you want to put it out, So she might have gotten like, they start flashing money in front of you and you go, all right, you bite off more than you can chew.
Well, sure. All great points. But, and I mean, as a comic I love this job. It's been my job for, it'll be 12, 13 years. If you got that level of fame, you don't know how long that's going to last. So the idea of just going like, hey, I'll give you $8 million if you can give us a comedy special in 10 months, 8 months, right, whatever. There's biting off more than you can chew in that situation.
Yeah.
I couldn't, there's no way I could say no. I'm like, they're giving me $8 million, $10 million. I hope she got, because, in that stratosphere of Chris Rock got $20 million a special, Dave Chappelle got $20 million a special. I hope that Schumer is also in that $20 million a special. And I mean, you want a penthouse apartment in New York, punch out an hour of comedy in 10 months. Now, but Bill Burr, by the time he would have said that, well, I'm just going to work at my own pace. Well, he would have had 8, 10, 12 specials out. So now he's like, he's in his early 40s. He's like, I'm going to take my time a bit. But when you first have that, I'm starting to hit, and Schumer would have been early 30s. God, you don't know how long that ride's going to last.
Well,
it's like, just get it.
Since you put out an hour special, how do you feel when you're going ahead now after, how long ago was that special that you put out?
2011. Yeah, 10 years.
10 years. So now you've got a new hour, or do you do some of the old stuff? Do you ever do the old stuff still?
No, that's a good question. I had a couple. I was at a comedy club in Winnipeg called Rumors. It's amazing. If there's any comics listening to this, Rumors Comedy Club is one of the best comedy clubs in the world. It's really, really great. They teach you. It's been around for 32 or 33 years. So I was there for a weekend, and this couple comes up to me after the show, and they were like, "We saw you on TV, and we came down to count how many jokes you repeated from your special on TV." I'm like, "How bored are you?"
What an asshole.
Okay, they came to the show, they bought a ticket, so fine, judge away. But I'm like, did I repeat any? And they're like, no, you didn't repeat one. Would I have repeated one if it fit a situation that was taking place in the room at that time? Yeah, I would have. Like, I'm not, I wish I had, there's sometimes when you're like, oh, somebody's got a joke about a nurse. Like, oh, well, there's a joke about a nurse on my comedy special. So you're a nurse. I would have told that joke and not thought of like, oh, there's somebody in the audience making sure I don't repeat material.
That's so funny. So, it's usually the opposite, by the way. When somebody comes and they're a fan, they're like, hey, we wanted to hear that.
They want to hear.
Like,
I wish I would have. This was a moment that was like such a compliment, and I wish I would have known it was taking place.
You had Rain Man came to your show.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's funny that you tie it in. You got there before. This is a true. So I was headlining a show in Kamloops, which is near Vancouver. It's about 4.5, 5 hours drive from Vancouver in British Columbia in Canada. So near the end of my set, somebody shouted something out that sounded very unintelligible. And I didn't quite catch what the person said. And I had some fun with it. The person repeated it. And I'm like, I couldn't hear what they were saying. It came up, it turned out it was an autistic boy. He would have been probably 20. He was in the bar. He loved my comedy special on TV, and he had memorized every joke. And I hadn't told his favorite joke yet, and he was shouting out which joke it was, and I couldn't understand him enough that I didn't know what he was saying. If I would have known that he was requesting a joke, I would have told that joke. And so I gave him a CD and chatted with him for a while, but he's like, I just love your comedy. I'm just such a fan. And he was he knew every word of every joke from that TV special. And I was just like, oh, I think back to that moment, and I'm like, I wish I would have known what he was asking for. It's yeah. I'm not
Yeah, you couldn't understand him. You couldn't understand him.
yeah.
I mean, there's no, but I'm sure
Yeah,
he was a fan. Lars, I mean, look, you know, we have different target audiences. You have the neurotic who wants to catalog your jokes and make sure whether you're telling the right ones, and all kinds of, and I have Samoans. I have a big following in the Samoan community. So I'm not upset. I'm not upset that beautiful young women on Instagram don't love my comedy. I have the Samoans.
I have a friend a good comedian I think he lives in New Zealand now, or maybe Australia, James Nokize. So Noikse, James Nokize. He does all kinds of Samoan stuff. So we'll get you over there. Have you done a show out that way?
No, but
yeah.
The Samoans love me. They love me.
Yeah, we'll hook you up with James. He's so funny.
Cool, man.
Samoa. He's got some really.
I'm ready to finally reach my target audience.
Yeah. So as far as the question, like, have I retired like a comedian? Like, have I retired that material? No. And there's a moment where I saw a joke on the comedy special, and whenever I hear a comedian say something like this, it sounds so like such a humble brag, and I just want to be like, ugh. So the joke's not that funny. I'll tell you right now. I look like I'm not proud that it exists on television, but it's fine. So the joke was I remember opening up the newspaper, and there was an article, and the headline was impaired GPS. And it was a GPS system for somebody that was like visually impaired or hard of hearing. And that's what it was. The GPS would help you get around. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. It would be very nice to have, whenever I was drunk, to have a GPS to help me out, where they're like, and it's just like, whatever. Like, so I was like, the comedy special came on and that joke was on, and I'm like, I had no recollection of that joke. I don't remember ever telling it. And once I saw it, I was like, oh shit, I forgot all about that joke.
You were rewriting, you were going back to write again, which you didn't know. You were starting to think of a joke you'd already written, basically, that you had no idea that you'd written.
Well, I like, the special was on and the joke came on. And when I heard myself tell the joke, that was the first recollection I had of that joke in 10 years. Like, I was like, oh shit, I forgot all about that joke. And so that's where I hope to be in my career, where if I were to sit back and watch that special, which when I had a like, the network gives you a copy of the DVD. So I added the copy of the DVD with my CD. So I have a new CD that was out, this probably 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, but I put a copy of the TV special in with it. So there was like a DVD CD special, and I recorded something at the front of the DVD. So if anybody ever listens to this who bought one of my CD DVDs, I come out and I go, if you're watching this, it means I'm dead. Because the only reason somebody would put in a DVD at this point is you're like, hey, remember that guy who liked this comedy? Oh yeah, he died. Well, let's watch his old DVD. That's the only reason you'd find a DVD player and put a DVD in at this point. I completely forgot about that. But if I were to like have to sit through that old special, I would go like, oh, I forgot that joke. I forgot about that joke. I forgot. And I hope that I'm a more seasoned and mature writer. I hope my material's better. Boy, I got a new joke. Let me tell you, I got a new one that.
Well, I hope that you don't get to the age. I hope that you have the elasticity of mind for many long years, that you don't sit down and watch your comedy and become somebody who goes, oh, who's this guy? I hope for your sake, you forget your jokes, but you never lose that. You lose your numbers. Dude, it has been so great having you on. We have been on for an hour, I think. Has it been an hour?
Yeah. Yep.
We've done an hour.
Yeah,
so in honor of our hour that we've done, if you could tell, first of all, if you could tell people where they can find you on social media, if they want to look you up, websites, social media handles.
Yeah, sure. So if they're on Instagram or Twitter, I'm a huge fan of Twitter. I wish it wasn't going the way of MySpace, But if you're on Instagram or Twitter, it's extra, like the word extra, EXTRA, and then Lars, extra Lars. When I was in my 20s, that was a silly, my friends call me Lars, but my girlfriends call me extra Lars. Single in my 40s. And I follow everybody back. So how I recommend you approach this, if you want, is you go to extra Lars on Instagram or Twitter, you follow me, I follow you back, then you can unfollow me and you gain a follower.
Gosh, only a Canadian would be that generous. I think I gained followers from you, actually. I think I had like 600 new people one day or something. And it's because you did something. And yeah. So
play a game,
Lars on Twitter. Where else? Is that it or anywhere else?
Yeah, Instagram. Yeah, Instagram. You know what I haven't done? Here's what I'm going to do. And so I was doing a podcast in Ottawa, Canada, which is our nation's capital, just in case you're not from Canada. If anybody was like, what's the capital of Canada? Go, Ottawa. That's our nation's capital. So I was doing a show there and I did this podcast, and the two podcasters made a joke about me having extra Lars for everything. So like .com, Instagram, Twitter. And they're like, I wonder if they have it on TikTok. Now, I haven't looked at it. I went and signed up to see if they had extra Lars available, and it was. I'm going to start telling comedy stories on my TikTok. I honestly have barely opened it, but I want to start, and I think you should. I mean, having a podcast is brilliant, but the idea of telling some of the stories when you saw or met some of the people, or some of the stories that you were in the room for, because I think that those moments are so great, like for podcasts, for that kind of medium where you have a little more time, because like hanging out with Joan or getting blackout drunk with Bob Saget, and I don't want to be just a name dropper. Like I want to be my own comedian.
But you've got some great stories, period.
Yeah.
Bottom line, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
I
cool.
toured. Yeah.
So there will be TikTok coming. There's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. No.
Sure. Well, I don't have if you have a Facebook fan page as a comedian in Canada, people make fun of you. So I've reluctantly resisted that. But yeah, they find me on all those. And if they want to know how much the Comedy Now paid, they can send me a message and I'll tell them exactly how much it paid.
Okay. And what are you working on now? Where can we find you? What can we look forward to?
So last summer we started an outdoor thing, and if you're 25 years into comedy, you don't need to do comedy outdoors. Like that's how I feel with my 18-year career, where you're like, I can leave that to the new kids. But last year we started this because there wasn't anywhere else to perform. We did 162 shows outdoors in people's backyards. So the Fire Pit, all one word, we reinvented the word, Fire Pit Comedy Tour. People can go to the Fire Pit Comedy Tour Facebook page and see pictures from they don't even have to like the page, all 160 shows. We did some ones in the rain that were hilarious, and we're making a bit of a project with that. We filmed the last 60 shows, so you might see that on Amazon Prime or Crave or Hulu or Netflix or YouTube. So we're working on that project right now. That's what's going on, as Alberta just went into a slightly more serious lockdown.
Very cool, brother. And hey, I'm going to be back on tour. By the way, yes, I've been doing comedy 25 years. And the only thing that saved me, I think, mentally were the outdoor shows that I did around Los Angeles, because nothing was happening indoors. And even the outdoor shows I did, they'd have to move them every week to keep from the authorities knowing where they were. So I did need those this past year, and I'm grateful for them. But I will be back on tour May 25th in Sarasota, Florida at the Baha'i Hut. You can find all this on my social media. And the 26th in Flagler Beach, Florida. And I'm not sure the name of the venue yet, but keep track of my stuff and you'll find it. And Lars Callieou, right? Calliou.
Nailed it.
Man, I got it. Lars Callieou. Dude, thank you so much for coming on and revisiting with me. And the next time we talk, we'll figure out when that radio bit was, and we'll reconnect on that.
That sounds perfect. We'll have you back on Comic Genius.
I can't wait, brother. Maybe we'll tour together one day. That would be a lot of fun.
Oh, I hope so.
Hey, thanks for coming on, dude. And No Idea Zone. Thanks for joining us with my first Canadian comedian on the No Idea Zone. Thanks, Lars. See you guys.
Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed whatever you saw on our channel today. Make sure to like, comment, and share everything you see here. And please hit that big red subscribe button. You have no idea how much it helps the No Idea Zone every time you hit that button. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next installment of the No Idea Zone.